Hello, and welcome to Assuring the Privacy of IBM iData. Today's webinar is sponsored by Precisely and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this special event. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in our webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio or slide advancement issues. But if that doesn't work, just let us know in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources, and I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to learn more about Precisely. Also in there, you can find a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. And third, of course, at the end of this webinar, we will be awarding a $300 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Now, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. Finally, one of the best benefits of this event is the opportunity to ask a question of our expert presenter. So to help encourage your questions, we have a special additional prize for you. That's another Amazon gift card, this one for $50, for the best question. At the end of the event, we'll look at all the questions, pick out the very best one, and contact that prize winner. And with that, let's get to today's fantastic content. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenter today, Bill Hammond. Bill is Director of Product Marketing at Precisely. So Bill, great to have you here. Take it away.
Appreciate the introduction, and thanks everybody for joining today. Appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us for today's topic, ensuring the privacy of IBM iData. So let's look at what we're going to talk about today. I want to start just kind of setting up the conversation with why this is such an important topic and why securing the data on the IBM I is so critical. And then we'll talk a little bit on two different topics, sort of the encryption topic itself, protecting data with encryption, and that'll primarily be focused on data that's at rest. And then we're also going to be talking about the importance of encryption when you're applying it to data in motion, as data gets moved around your internal network or outside of your network. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the end about how we can help you and some of the ways Precisely can offer to assist with this challenge you might have. And then we should have plenty of time left for Q&A at the end that Janine will help us with. So as we move into the first part of the topic here, what I wanted to start off with was just kind of setting up this, why is this data privacy thing such a big deal and why is it so essential? It really has become a fundamental part of doing business. There are regulations in place. There are the risk, there's the risk of breaches and all of the pain and frankly, financial and otherwise pain that can be, in store for you if you do have a breach. And also just, the negative publicity that happens. These things get publicized all the time. I mean, it's a rare day that you don't, look at your news feed and find somebody, not talking about a recent data breach. So it's obviously something that you need to be thinking about and need to be taking steps to remediate. And the other thing to keep in mind here too is data privacy. It can be compromised from outside the organization, and that's what we tend to think about. But it can also be, compromised from inside, and even from inside when somebody is not necessarily an internal employee that's a bad actor or trying to do something wrong. They can be an erroneous sort of, misuse or, access to data can happen. So, you need to be thinking both protecting inside and outside your environment to make sure that your data is protected in the event that somebody does get access to it. At the bottom there, you'll see there's a number of regulations that are out there that specifically speak to the need to encrypt your data and the data privacy elements of some of these regulations. HIPAA's been around for a while. We're all pretty familiar with GDPR. PCI DSS is really about credit card transactions and things. California consumer privacy. There's a number of them, and across the world, these exist in different companies. And as we are more of a global economy, we have to be aware of those as well. And if you look at some of those regulations, just in how they actually talk about data privacy and what they require you to do. HIPAA I mentioned before. When you look at the HIPAA regulations and the scope of that regulation, it talks about encryption and key management and recommends the certain types of key management pieces. So and that one's been around for quite a while. HIPAA's been around since '96. Seems ancient in our current world, but it has been around for a while. But it speaks to encryption as well. When you look at the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is only a couple of years old, frankly, it talks about making sure that you are handling personal information, customers' personal information in an appropriate way, and being able to mask or hide that data. So again, it's speaking to the elements of encryption and data protection here, data privacy. Another one that speaks to it directly here is the PCI DSS one. This one was really focused, again, on credit card transactions and financial services companies that handle and process those kind of transactions. So you can see here they're specifically looking at making sure that your cardholder, both the name, number of card, all that kind of stuff is protected, that you're encrypting the data as it transfers across networks. And again, speaking to the encryption piece directly with the key management. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So again, there's a number of these, and I could have gone on and on. It's the part of almost every one of the global cybersecurity regulations. So encryption is something that you need to do for the protection of your business. It's also something you may be required to do based upon your industry and the regulations and requirements that you have from there. Okay. Another that's really a more recent threat is this issue of malware and ransomware. Ransomware is a specific type of malware, but what ransomware does, if you're not familiar with it, is get access to your data and then essentially locks it up or locks it down and sends you the notice that unless you pay this amount of money, we're going to delete your data. Your business is basically being held hostage. And the challenge with ransomware is it's actually not just some bad actor in their basement trying to do something. It's becoming a very sophisticated, very much almost an industry around ransomware, to the extent that you can go out and buy on the dark web ransomware tools that you can then apply yourself. So it's almost like its own little cottage industry that's springing up, and the sophistication of these tools continues to get more not only sophisticated but harder to detect and harder to manage. Remediation once it's on your system can sometimes be impossible. So the big element that we always like to talk about is this threat to your business. The best thing that you can really do is try to prevent it in the first place. You don't want to try to address ransomware by scanning for it and finding it once it's on your system. Ideally, what you would want to do is keep it from getting on the system in the first place. And this ransomware thing is not shrinking. It's growing. It's getting ever more sophisticated, and it's getting ever more dangerous. So the people that are using this kind of thing to attack companies are doing more and more and more in terms of trying to find ways to get on your system. So we really recommend a sort of multi-layered defense. And one of those lines of defense, frankly, is encryption. Access control is a big piece. You want to be monitoring. There's a number of other pieces that we would recommend that you string together in a multi-layered sort of defense. But encryption is one of the ones that you really need to take into account here to try to make sure that even if they were to get access to your data, that you're not going to, the data will not be readable by them. So kind of the last line of defense in the ransomware thing, no matter what happens, if they do get access to the data, at least you protected it and it's unreadable and really unusable by them. They can't really sell the data and try to profit that way. You also when you're talking about encryption, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about this as we talk through some of the elements of encryption, but you know, using well-known, tested algorithms to do your encryption, because the thing with encryption is the algorithms themselves are public. The keys to unlock those algorithms are the private piece that you keep for yourself, and you and only you have the ability then to unlock that data. So just that as a little bit of a preamble for the concept or the topic of encryption and why it's so important, both from a regulatory standpoint and just simply a business protection standpoint, even with the increasing prevalence of malware and ransomware out there. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about protecting data with encryption and some of the specifics on the IBM I platform. You know, one of the things that I always like to highlight for people is I want to disabuse anybody of the notion that the IBM I is some inherently secure platform that isn't being attacked by all these things we read in the news. The reality is the IBM I houses data that's very high value data. It runs applications that are mission critical to companies, and it's definitely becoming a target of the hacker community, if you want to think about it that way. It has transaction data, it has customer records, it has financial data. It's got high value data. So you really need to be looking at your IBM I as a system that needs to take advantage of the sorts of layers of protection that you can apply. So with that said, it's why it's important in the IBM I. Let's talk a little bit about what encryption really is. And stated really simply, we're talking about taking information that normally would be readable and putting it in an unreadable format. So even if someone can get access to the data, and we would encourage you to have a whole bunch of layers of defense before they could ever get to your data, access control, and as I said, other tools. The fundamental purpose of encryption is if they do indeed get into your system that much, they cannot read the data and make use of the data. Again, as I kind of earlier pointed out, encryption is based on these well-known algorithms that have been out there for years. They're very much tested in the world, and then the key really is the piece that you keep protected and private, and having the key is what allows you to unlock, really lock and unlock the data that you're encrypting. The best encryption solutions out there will be certified. NIST is one of the bodies that does this sort of thing. So looking for NIST certification is an important piece. And again, the algorithm, which there's multiple algorithms you can pick. Which one you pick is less, is not really as important as making sure that you do pick one and then you do what you need to do to keep the keys secret, because that's how you lock and unlock the data. And again, this is not new technology. Encryption's been out there for a long time. It continues to get better and more secure and more usable, frankly, but it is not a new technology that's sprung up in the current world we live in, where ransomware and malware are running rampant. This has been around for years and years. So, encryption is not a new technology, but it's maybe there's a heightened sense of urgency to employ encryption. Some of the tips, and as we pointed out earlier, the slides here are available to you, and I'd encourage you to grab them, because there's a lot of tips that we're going to be going through, and we won't be going through them all independently in a lot of detail. So, I'll hit some of the high points here, but I really want the audience to take these tips and use them and take them with you after this presentation is over. So again, some IBM I specific encryption tips. Beware of homegrown or non-standard encryption that you might find out there. Like I said, there's some very established and known encryption algorithms that have been tested over time, and we encourage you to use those in your encryption solution. You want to look for independent assessments on which ones are the best. Certifications, as I mentioned, you can see a few of them on the slide here. These well-known encryption algorithms are going to be best from a performance standpoint as well. And when you're thinking about IBM I specifically, it can be this DB2 protection in the IBM I is something you want to make sure that can happen in your IBM I environment. You want to be able to understand the DB2 environment, because that's so fundamental to the IBM I. There are additional solutions that can provide some capabilities, and they give you APIs and commands that can automate some of this stuff. You want to make sure that your encryption solution can deal with everything on the IBMI. We're talking like, the IFS, as well as, backups and data in motion, things like that. And then there's a couple of specific things on the IBMI side, open access for RPG or if your encryption solution can handle those, you make it much easier to encrypt legacy RPG applications that you might have on your system and encrypt those indexes. And then field proc is another IBMI specific sort of thing that allows you to, implement logging and masking and access control, frankly, across a number of different elements of the IBMI. And you can even have the access control for those keys. Like I said, you want to always protect those keys. So the field proc thing really speaks to the IBMI platform specifically. Another piece, besides just the generalized, okay, what is encryption, where you make the data unreadable, there are a couple of specific really things that fall under that umbrella that I wanted to talk about. I want to talk about tokenization and anonymization as well. So what tokenization is that's where you replace that sensitive data, that data that you want to encrypt in your system. And a point that's worth making as we talk about this is encryption isn't necessarily something you should be encrypting all of your data. That's not the point. The point is you need to encrypt the important data or the data that's going to protect your customer's privacy or your company's, intellectual property, things like that. So you need to approach encryption in an intelligent sort of way of saying, what do I need to encrypt and what is it okay that I don't encrypt? What is not, personally identifiable information or, trade secret sort of information. So when you're thinking about this, when you're looking at tokenization, one of the ways that you can secure some of that sensitive data is by replacing it with substitute values. And then those values are stored in the database that always maintains the relationship between that original value and the token. So it sees the token, it knows what the value is, and you can go back and get that. There's a number of different characteristics of the people that, or the ways you would see this embodied. Some ones you would see would be things like, preserving the format of a credit card number, but it's not the actual credit card number itself. You just have a token for that particular thing. And again, the token that can be provided can actually be the token for that particular number, no matter where it exists in your system. You can have a one-to-many sort of relationship with that. And when the data is accessed and it's been tokenized, that data will display in sort of its original form, like I said, but it's masked and you won't be able to see it unless you are indeed, the user that has access to that data. You don't want to mask the data from everybody. You want to be able to do that on a user-by-user sort of basis. So when you're thinking of implementing tokenization, what you want to do is remove that. This is data that you want to remove from the scope of compliance and reduce the risk of it being exposed in a breach. You encrypt the token vault too to make the vault the focus of the compliance. What you're actually going to be compliant with is making sure that those tokens and that vault that they live in is encrypted and tokenized. The important thing to remember here is tokens can't be reversed with a key because there's no algorithmic way to get that data back in or relationship to that original data. So tokenization actually is, essentially replacing that data. It works well for BI and queries since it does maintain those database relationships, but that privacy, that the specific data is not actually retained. The tokenization is a common thing you'll see in credit card payments and the systems that they use. So kind of a build on top of tokenization where you're taking a sensitive piece of data and creating something that is, tied to it, but it's not that piece of data. Another thing that you'll see frequently is a form of tokenization, really anonymization. And that's a form of tokenization that permanently replaces that sensitive data with these tokens, but they aren't stored in that token vault, so you're really not able to get them back. This replaces every piece of that original data with the same token, and there's a different variety of methods that you can use here to tokenize or anonymize that data. And we've seen different ones. You see scrambled data, you see different like a credit card number where you only see the last 4 digits or the first couple digits or things like that. So there's a variety of different ways to do this. This is not a solution that you want to use on a production server because, as I said earlier, that the tokens are not recoverable. This is a way to provide that data for testing environments or in a reporting environment where somebody's never going to be able to get back to the original data and actually ever get that full credit card number. If you need to retrieve that credit card number, anonymization isn't something you want to use. So, a lot of times this is also referred to as redaction, where you're actually removing the ability to ever see that number in its entirety, and you're just going to see the anonymized version of it with XXXXX dash 1234. Another name that you'll hear is de-identification or whatever. But the important thing here is, these tokens are not recoverable, and you can't go back. If I've got the anonymized data, there's no path back to the original data. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when you're choosing whether you want to use tokenization or specifically use the anonymization capability of tokenization. So some tips when you're talking about it, and again, I can't say this enough, it's not able to be reversed. There's no relationship to the original data. So this is only appropriate in a case where you may want to be doing, some BI reporting or sharing some data with another party, and you never need to go back and get the actual, full credit card number or things like that. It's usually not used in a production server for that reason. This is more, again, like in a reporting environment, or you're pushing data up to a data lake or something like that. It does anonymize the data, and it's, like I pointed out, test systems are a good environment, BI reporting, things like that. If you need to send it to an outside service and needs to be scrubbed because of compliance regulations on what you can share with outside parties, for example, there might be HIPAA regulations where you're reporting your aggregate healthcare data as a healthcare company, but you want to make sure that you've removed any ability to tie any individual records back to a person. That kind of thing, where you're permanently scrubbing that data and making sure that it is never going to be, be able to track back to the individual user. Both GDPR and the California Consumer Privacy Act require this kind of anonymization for customer privacy, as well as the financial elements of this as well from a security standpoint. One of the things that Precisely uniquely has the capability to do on the IBMI is sort of tie our security capabilities to our high availability capabilities and the replication that goes on as part of an HA environment. And so this can come into a play from an anonymization standpoint, that maybe when you want to populate that dev or test server, you can use the replication capability of your HA solution, but at the same time you can anonymize that data, so it becomes, you're not actually exposing yourself to a data security issue by sending that data to yet another system. So the anonymization here can help in that test environment or development environment that you may need to create. So the last piece of the encryption conversation that I wanted to talk about is masking. So it's related to the whole tokenization and anonymization thing, but masking is essentially obscuring a portion of that viewable data so that there's a minimum to the user that they can sort of, yeah, that's me. They can sort of almost authenticate themselves. Yes, this is my account, or this is my, information. And you can do this, you can fully block off things or partially block them off. Again, an example I used earlier to make the point was, being able to just see the final 4 digits on a credit card number is a common. I think we've all seen that. You also see it when you log into your bank account. They'll probably obscure your full account number and just give you a few numbers at the end to validate that, yeah, that's the right account. There's a number of different ways that this can be done. You can do it partially, you can block the whole thing, any combination. So having the flexibility when you do need to mask data, where you want to be able to present part of the accurate data to a user for whatever reason, but not give them the full access to whether it's a record or, again, count numbers, things like that. You want to have the ability to do partial masking as opposed to full masking. Another thing that's important is when you're masking that you have the ability to base it on users and who's accessing this data. Am I presenting this to the ultimate end user? Is this an internal user, a group that may need access to more of the data than less? You can control the masking that way. There's just a couple of tips when you're thinking about masking that I wanted to sort of highlight. It can help enforce separation of duties, and it's because of that last point I just made about when it's a user that's accessing it that has a certain level of rights in the IBM world, for example, you can mask it a certain way, but you can change that masking parameter if it's being accessed by somebody who has different levels of rights. So you can have this, okay, I'm the user, and you get some masking applied there, but if you're the administrator, you get a different level of masking applied. And the other piece is really that masking being used on otherwise unprotected data. If you want to think about data that's not encrypted, you can keep that data from view. It doesn't protect the data from a breach, and that's kind of an important element of masking. If somebody is able to get to this, it doesn't protect the data itself. It's the view that you're protecting here. You're only showing part of it, but you haven't gone through the process with masking of actually fully encrypting the data. It's not that sort of a solution. So we talked generally about encryption. We've talked about the level of tokenization, and then anonymization being a specific part of tokenization, and then the ability to do some masking. All those things are key capabilities that you want to look for in any encryption solution that you may choose to evaluate or look at. Now but those are all data that is in or at rest. Data is living on the disk, and somebody may need to access it or view it, look at it, pull up a record, things like that. The other piece that I wanted to talk about that is equally as important, and frankly sometimes gets forgotten, is the challenge around data in motion. This sensitive data that lives on your hard drives, you're worried about people accessing it, you want to encrypt it and make sure it's protected. That's all well and good, but as you're sharing data both across your own internal network and across the maybe the open internet as you're trading data with a business partner or even customers, you want to make sure that the data in motion is considered as well. Some of the challenges with this, though, manually encrypting data when you're about to do a data transfer can be very unwieldy and time consuming, as it says here. It's a real challenge to do that effectively and remember to do it. And then as part of regulations, in a lot of cases we saw earlier, this is important, and having to track all those transfers and, if something fails, resubmitting it, keeping a log of that so that you can prove it later to auditors. That's all going to come up in compliance review things as well. So that's a big challenge as well. Getting the files themselves from, say, like an FTP server, and then getting them into either your customers, your partners, or your own, ERP or other system can really require a lot of manual, both encryption and unencryption pieces that you might have to go through. And as you're, trying to even send this stuff, you have encrypted it, you're sending it securely over some of these other protocols that you have. We list ACH here and positive pay. Those are popular in the financial services element. Even then, it can be a burden from a human effort or human error standpoint to make sure that this gets done right. So really, the bottom line here is the more manual this challenge you have or the more manual you approach this challenge of the data in motion, the more likelihood you're going to have some problems and human error and hard to document and prove that you're doing it right every time. You can validate the transfer went through, all those kind of things. So when you look at the challenge here, one of the things that we would say, and some of the pieces that we'd want you to consider, would be a secure file transfer that can encrypt the data as it moves across, as I said, both internal and external networks, and never have it be seen, in the clear text format as it's moving around there. The third-party solutions that you can employ for this kind of thing will handle a lot of that automation details that I mentioned, making sure that things get done on time, that they're logged, that they make sure that you're able to, prove later that the right things happened. Being able to, if you've got a lot of times these sorts of transmissions to, say, a business partner, or something that happened, at the end of the day, at the end of every week, when you can automate that process so you're not having to check all check all the boxes, dot all the I's and cross all the T's every time you're doing that transfer. If you can set that up and automate that, that's a huge, advantage. And having, programmable interfaces, application programmable interfaces or APIs to enable you to integrate with your secure file transfer thing and make this process, more bulletproof, more reliable, and really just more consistent, and document that whole thing. That's really important as well. Sometimes the secure file transfer piece will need to make sure that they have the ability to keep that data encrypted as it's moving, but then ensure it remains private when it lands at the other site as well. And again, much like encryption, this secure file transfer thing isn't new. It's not a new technology, but sometimes when people are considering, the privacy of the data, which generally people's minds go to encryption, I always like to make sure that we're pointing out at the same, in the same breath, sort of, that this data in motion is every bit as important to keep in mind as the encryption of the data that's, at rest on your system. And, you're thinking about, that could be vulnerable to a data breach because somebody got access to my system. Well, a data breach may indeed come while somebody is, intercepting a transfer of information like this. So that data needs to be protected as well. And, I'll leave you with that final thought, that don't leave out the issue of data in motion when you're thinking about securing the privacy of all the IBM data that you have. So the last really topic that I wanted to sort of cover was to give you a sense of, how Precisely stacks up with helping you out with these kind of challenges. So when we look at our Precisely security offering, our Assure security product family here, we really focus on a couple of different strategic areas. We focus on access control, which I mentioned a couple of times. If you can keep people off your system and make sure only the right people get access to the right data, that's a really key first step. But when access control fails, you want to make sure that if somebody who is a bad actor gets into your system, that you want to be able to protect yourself, and that's where encryption comes in. The other piece that we have that can help you is the monitoring and compliance piece. And this is critical no matter what, piece of the security landscape you're trying to address, whether it's the encryption piece, access control, any of those elements. The data privacy piece is the encryption piece here we'll talk about. But you want to be able to document what you're doing. You want to be able to make sure it's repeatable, and you want to be able to monitor for what's going on in your system. So that's our compliance monitoring focus, and we have some products that you use in combination with each other to solve that problem. And then data privacy is really where what we've talked about today focuses. With data privacy, you're talking about things like encryption, both data at rest and data in motion, and all the conversation we had about tokenization, anonymization, masking, key management, and how important that is. That's all kind of in our data privacy focus area. And then the final one that we talk about, and this is interesting because it actually combines a number of these tools in a layered sort of approach to make sure that your malware defense essentially is not identifying malware when it gets on your system or trying to scan for it and then remediate it after the fact. We want to encourage people to take the stance of you need a multi-layered level of defense to keep the malware from ever getting on your system in the first place. And generally on the IBM system, the vulnerability to malware is coming in from an infected user's PC or system onto the IFS, and from there, depending on the rights of that user, propagating to other areas of the IBMI system and getting, access to data that it shouldn't get access to. So our malware defense is encouraging people to, not only be worried about access control and then monitoring, but then even if those things were to fail, you've encrypted the data. And I usually liken that multi-layer defense thing to, if you think about your own home, you probably want to lock the doors to keep people that shouldn't be in your house out. That's a good first step. But you know what? You also want to lock the windows. And even if you've got those things in place, you probably don't want to leave, money laying around on the counter or important paperwork. You're going to put that, in a filing cabinet somewhere, and you're going to lock that filing cabinet if it's really important data. So that's the element of, layering these things together. So if you were to be breached at one level, you aren't automatically open to everything. So that's kind of our conversation on malware defenses. Use these layers of security to try to mitigate as much as possible the malware or ransomware from ever getting on your system in the first place. When we talk about data privacy and malware defense, data privacy is what we spoke about today, and I wanted to highlight the fact that really it is an integral part of malware defense as well. So data privacy for its own sake and from those compliance regulations that we talked about earlier is critically important, but also consider data privacy from the standpoint of the defense capability it has against malware ever getting on the system if somebody does get in, protecting them against actually seeing the data. So when we look at our product offering here, we really have two different products. One, our encryption product, and we again talk about that as protection for the data at rest, and we support all the field proc exit point capabilities that you need. Another element that's really critical here is the performance, because encryption and decryption comes at a price from a performance standpoint. So you want to be able to have a solution that is highly performant, can do that sometimes complex work to encrypt files and then decrypt them when somebody who's legitimately needs to look at it. You want that process to be as fast as possible. And having built-in capabilities for things like the masking and anonymization and tokenization that we talked about as well. And also NIST certification is an important capability of our Assure encryption offering. When we look at Assure encryption, another piece, I mentioned this earlier as well, making sure that you're supporting those really tried and true key managers that are out there, and covering everything that you need to specific to the IBMI environment. Things like save files, IFS, all those IBMI specific things, making sure that your encryption solution can cover that, and we can with our Assure encryption as well. We have APIs that can plug right into the RPG, as I mentioned earlier, RPG applications and COBOL applications. We integrate with Townsend's Alliance Key Manager for off-partition key management, and also the OASIS compliant key managers out there as well. You want to make sure your encryption solution is easy to manage and monitor. I talked about our monitoring capabilities as well, but just getting it set up, the management interface is very easy to use, and you can control who has access to things by policies with we fully support the group profiles that are already created in the IBMI as well. And then some auditing capabilities that come as part of our monitoring as well. When we look at our Assure secure file transfer, as you might expect, this is our solution for that data in motion. So, as you're moving data around, as I said, with customers or your partners, being able to do that, and with Assure secure file transfer, we can do that across internal networks or external networks. We can encrypt it, before the transfer and then decrypt it at the destination if that's what you want to do. We can encrypt virtually any of those file types. And I mentioned how important DB2 database files are, but flat files, IFS, the save files that are out there, spool files, again, all those IBMI, types of data or types of files and information that you need, we can take care of that. We can deal with zip files, or PDF formats as well. There are a couple of common transfer protocols that products like this would use. Secure shell, or secure FTP are the two common ones, and we support both of those. You also want this your secure file transfer capability, the product you choose, the implementation you choose, to be able to log and record everything that it's done so that you can indeed, prove and be in compliance with some of those regulations that I pointed out earlier. We support PGP as well, which a lot of people have the requirement to support that pretty good privacy stuff. And then, another piece that's part of that, the PGP story really, is we can receive files via secure file transfer from other systems like Windows, Linux, and Unix. It doesn't have to be just an IBM-I to IBM-I data transfer. So we're agnostic from that standpoint as well. Probably the single biggest benefit of the Assure secure file transfer is the automation and just the simplicity of the management. I challenged you to think about before about how complex and how human error prone that this process could be if you're doing, all the stuff you need to do for a file in motion, all the encryption and everything and decryption and deciding how to do it. And if it's a repeated thing that you do every week or at the end of every day, having to have the human resource to do that and do a manual process. What we can do with our Assure secure file transfer is be able to take that off your plate and set it up once and just have it repeat based on those parameters, and then document it and log it so you can prove that it's happening the same way every time with a level of a guarantee that you can't do if you're just dealing with everyone as sort of a one-off. So it allows administrators to set it up once and have it continue to run. If there are problems with the transfer, you can choose to be notified with an email or an SMMP trap, or be notified via some message format that you want. We can also get confirmation of the transfer out to a distribution list. So you don't have to just notify one person, you can notify multiple people, and we can integrate with APIs so we can fundamentally support, RPG, COBOL, and just the CL programs that are very common in the IBM-I environment. So again, the encryption of data needs to be considered across what's on file, sitting, at rest, and what's in motion. And I'm hopeful that today's conversation gave you some things to think about making sure you're covering all the bases, making sure you're thinking kind of holistically about what your encryption solution needs to cover, and also what kind of data that you really believe needs to be encrypted, and encrypt what you need to, and don't encrypt what you don't need to. So at this point, I will transition us into any of the Q&A that has come in. What did we have come in from a Q&A standpoint?
Yeah, great presentation, Bill. So the first question that we've had come in is this: are the masking and anonymization capabilities separate products of Assure Security?
Yeah, good question, because I broke those down into, really distinct little conversations. The reality is our Assure Security encryption solution includes anonymization capabilities, masking, tokenization. It's all a choice that you make within that. They're not separate purchases. So if you purchase our encryption solution, you will get all of those capabilities. So they aren't separate products. They're all part of the whole when you acquire the Assure encryption piece.
Okay, the next question, and I think you touched on this, but would love to hear if you have any other comments. Will encryption protect us against a ransomware attack?
Yeah, that might have come in early. It's a question we get all the time. It provides some level of protection in that your data is not, you can't be under a threat of somebody taking your data and posting it on the open web or something like that, because the data is encrypted and theoretically unreadable. It shouldn't be considered as a full protection against ransomware, because generally what happens with ransomware is they might have access to some of your data and hold that for ransom, if you will. And if that data is encrypted, you might be able to mitigate that. But generally what they're doing is encrypting holding your whole system hostage. I mean, they're talking about everybody's access to your IBM-I goes away, and they've locked that system down. So it's not a matter of the ransomware, hey, our data is encrypted. If you can't use your system at all, it's still that's a bigger problem. So encryption is a piece of what I would consider that multi-layered defense, because it can help mitigate the impact of a ransomware attack. but I would not consider, well, I've got my data encrypted, so I'm not vulnerable to ransomware. The danger there is that your whole system could be locked down, and it doesn't matter if the data is encrypted or not. If your users aren't able to access your IBM system, you're probably going to have some real pain there, because obviously the IBM runs a lot of, as I said, mission critical important applications, and that's the danger. So it's part of the puzzle for ransomware protection, but it is certainly not in and of itself what I would consider a ransomware, protection solution. You need to be combined with other solutions.
Okay, Bill. Well, it looks like we're going to have to leave it there. But before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business. It's the $300 Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of that gift card today is Robert Davila from Texas. So congratulations to Robert. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Bill Hammond and Precisely for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. We did have more questions than we had time to get to today. We will get those over to the Precisely team. But that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.